You know, I've wanted to check out Left 4 Dead for a while, and since the game is starting to get pretty old, I thought now was finally the time to check it out. But since I don't really have many, friends, it never really felt like the right time to check either of them out. Left 4 Dead is a 4-player co-op experience after all, and it's a bit strange to play through the entire campaign in single player. It's even the last option out of all the game modes in the main menu. The game is basically screaming at you to not play it in single player mode, which means that it is not the intended way to play Left 4 Dead at all. Only insane, stupid, dumb people would ever do that. So anyway, I booted up Left 4 Dead on single player to finally play through the first game's campaign after years of wanting to check it out. And what I found was a game that has a pretty fascinating single player experience. One that's nowhere near as bad as I've been led to believe. But as I said, this is absolutely not the intended way to play Left 4 Dead, or its sequel. You definitely miss out on something when you aren't playing with someone else, but if you're like me and keep putting the game off because you don't have people to play it with, the experience really isn't so bad. In fact, playing it this way turns what's normally a fun, action-packed experience into one that's pretty unnerving. And before anyone asks, because I know this question is gonna come, I know that you can play the first game's campaign in Left 4 Dead 2 and take advantage of that game's improvements, but I wanted the raw original experience that Left 4 Dead 1 offers, so I decided to just stick with the original version instead. At its core, Left 4 Dead is a game that tasks players with surviving an onslaught of zombie hordes as they cross the map and try to reach the safe room on the other side. Along the way, you'll have to navigate city streets, claustrophobic environments, and deal with powerful types of enemies that have unique abilities. The gameplay on display here isn't very complicated at all. In fact, some may find it too simple. There isn't really a storyline, at least not without really looking into external things like the comic books, and each level basically offers the same thing with different set dressing. It's essentially a race from one safe room to the next until you reach the end of the campaign. Now that would be a problem, but since the whole game takes only around 3 to 4 hours to play through, it's not something that really bothers me. In fact, the simplicity here is oddly refreshing. Left 4 Dead is a very basic game in concept, and that's where its greatest strength lies. Sometimes I don't want a game with an overly complex storyline, character progression, or whatever else I could grind away on. Occasionally, I like a game that just plops me into a situation, gives me a weapon, and lets me go to town. Left 4 Dead gives me exactly that, and if there was anything more complicated than what's already here, I think that could risk ruining this game's careful balance. In keeping with this simplicity, the first-person shooting isn't exactly the most diverse feeling thing, and by that I mean that most guns feel the same to shoot. The assault rifle may have a bit more recoil than the handgun, but there isn't much difference in personality between the two when you click fire. The same can be said for the Uzi, rifle, and the two shotguns. You could argue that this is by design though, since the game isn't really trying to aim for anything resembling a tactical experience. Or to pare it down even more, the game does not want you to have to account for anything besides hovering the crosshair over a zombie and shooting them in the head. And to make it clear, I'm not saying that your gun choice doesn't matter. Obviously, some guns are still better for certain things. Shotguns do a better job of clearing a room of zombies than the assault rifle, but aren't much good in more open environments, for example. This suits me just fine, to be honest. In fact, the more arcadey approach to the combat lets you just go for whatever gun you think looks the coolest and go to town. You don't get bogged down by which gun is technically the best, even though there certainly are better options than others. And the feeling of emptying a magazine on an entire horde feels pretty great, I won't lie. Since each weapon can be found multiple times in each level, you never feel like you need to commit to any one gun either. It can feel a bit samey after a while though, especially when you find the assault rifle, because that generally seems to be the best gun in the game in terms of balance. There are also some extremely light survival mechanics, if you want to call them that. Ammo for your primary weapons can only be replenished where there are ammo reserves, which are located in some parts of levels and in safe rooms. But ammo for your sidearms is infinite, so you'll never be left without some way of defending yourself. Beyond that, you can find Molotovs, which set an area on the ground alight, or a pipe bomb which attracts the horde before blowing up. And this thing saved my ass on more than one occasion. You also need to keep an eye on your health, which can be replenished with first aid kits, and pills offer a quick form of healing that lasts for a short while, but will decrease over time. Now, I've thrown the word campaign around here and there, but it's a bit more complicated than that. The campaign is actually split up into 5 smaller campaigns that are segmented into different levels. Most of these have 5 levels, except for Crash Course, which just has 2, and The Sacrifice, which has 3. Each of these campaigns have the same sort of flow. The survivors find themselves in a shitty situation, they progress until they can call someone for help, they escape, and the cycle repeats. The only one that's really different is The Sacrifice, which concludes with the player needing to make a... well, I think you get it. There isn't much else to talk about in terms of the gameplay, and I think that's fine. Again, it's oddly refreshing to play a game like Left 4 Dead that's so focused on giving you a simplified zombie killing experience. It's all about running through the level while staying alive and killing tons of zombies. But beyond that, Left 4 Dead offers up a pretty interesting horror experience too, one that I don't think would come across as well in co-op, and much of the heavy lifting here is done by the game's visuals and sound design. At this point, Left 4 Dead is just under 14 years old, and while the game does show some signs of age here and there, I think it holds up very well. The character models in particular showcase the Source Engine's ability to make characters feel alive. The little quirks in the facial animation, the detailing on each character's clothes, and the way each character comments on different situations still feels impressive to this day. And it's important that Valve nailed this because these 4 characters are the only humans you're going to be seeing throughout the game. These are the only real characters that we have to talk about at all. If they weren't presented in the right way, it would have made the experience kind of awkward. I think Valve also deserves some praise for the environment design as well. Most of the levels in Left 4 Dead are pretty simple, whether it be the city streets in No Mercy or the forest tracks in Blood Harvest, but there's still plenty of detail to be found in these levels too. One of the most impressive is Mercy Hospital, which has this really dingy sort of aesthetic. There's almost a sickly green looking filter on the screen, and the general atmosphere feels very unpleasant. Hospitals aren't really the nicest places to be in most of the time anyway, but this one in particular feels suitably creepy. It gave me flashbacks to Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines' medical clinic area, since they both share the same sort of vibe, which makes sense since both of these games run on the Source Engine. Then there are the apartments right at the start of the campaign. These rooms have just enough detail to feel lived in while still in keeping with the game's simple style. And while Left 4 Dead's storyline isn't really anything outside the usual zombie apocalypse shtick, the little bits and pieces it has are still really cool. In most of the safe rooms, you can check out different posters and scribbles from other survivors who were here before you. Some of these are funny, some of them are sad, and some of them are really sad. There's one where someone wrote out a heartfelt letter to someone they just lost, and all the other messages on the wall are just shitting on it. Then you have some that are seemingly written by children, and that's a very sad thing to think about. And one of the most uncanny things about this is that sometimes the AI teammates seem to look at these scribbles almost as if they're reading them. I don't know if this was just a lucky coincidence that I saw this, but it made reading these feel more impactful knowing that Bill was doing the same. The soundscape really helps to give these environments plenty of atmosphere as well, which is one of the things that I think playing in single player helps you to appreciate more. You're likely to be in some kind of voice chat while playing the game in co-op and laughing about how dumb some of the zombies are, but when you're alone, you can really soak up a lot more of the atmosphere. Whether that be the ambient noises as you travel through the apartments, or the sound of an approaching horde getting ready to feast, the tensions cut through with the often comedic voice acting from the cast that often chime in with some words of wisdom. But when Lewis makes a dumb remark that's then followed up with screams of genuine terror as he's grabbed by a hunter, it sounds even more chilling. Of course, since this is a zombie game, you can expect to see a few of those lying around here and there, and oh boy, it's still impressive to see just how many zombies can start coming after you in such a short amount of time. The feeling of setting off a car alarm or waiting for an elevator before you start to hear the horde approach is exhilarating. These zombies are fast and even show a bit of intelligence as they try to flank you and catch you off guard. And even though it only takes one shot in the head to take one down, if you're caught in a mosh pit, you're likely to take some damage. The special zombie types also add a delicious amount of carnage to certain combat encounters. The Smoker is probably my favorite, if only for the fact that it manages to shock me every time without fail. I will say that the limitations of the party AI can be quite bothersome in these situations. Oftentimes they'll just look around a bit before or actually freeing me from the deadly zombie. Left 4 Dead truly shines when it's able to parry great level with tense combat scenarios, but after a while, once you get to know the maps well enough, it's bound to get boring, right? Well, that's not exactly true. Left 4 Dead actually has a certain amount of randomization in each of its levels, and it's done in a very creepy way as this system is executed by something called the Director. The Director is essentially an AI that works in the background to alter the difficulty and pacing of a level depending on various circumstances. It'll spawn different amounts and types of enemies depending on your ammo, health, location, party status, basically anything that you're currently working with. It then tailors aspects of the level to maintain a certain amount of difficulty. The Director is also in charge of creating mood by placing different sound and visual cues throughout the level. When I found out about the system, it made the game feel a bit tenser than it did before. The idea that some kind of presence is constantly watching you as you make your way through each level is very unnerving. And this is where I want to talk about Left 4 Dead as a survival horror experience. When you really break it down, this game shares a fair amount in common with games like Resident Evil, mostly in a superficial way, sure, but let's look at it from that perspective for a second. When playing in single player, the game becomes far more like a typical survival horror in that you have no one to really help you out. The AI teammates can't do much more than shoot zombies and revive you. They can't perform tasks like operating mounted guns or pressing switches, which is how you actually progress in these levels. Unlike in the co-op mode, there's no one you can really rely on in the game. This adds a certain amount of tension to the game that's unique to single player. You can really absorb some of the quieter moments, and this game really manages to nail its spooky atmosphere. I think the Source engine manages to do so much heavy lifting in this regard, since so many of the environments have this realistic sort of feeling. And as I mentioned before, the sound design is excellent. There's nothing quite like the sound of eerie silence being broken up by the cries of a witch lurking somewhere around the next corner. Plus, the little moments with some of the zombies are fantastically creepy as well. Oftentimes you can just find one standing in a corner minding its business, or you can hear one crying as it sits alone in a hallway. The game's lighting is also still really impressive, and it uses the power of darkness almost perfectly. And one of my favorite quirks is that when you're reloading, since your torch is strapped to the gun, the animation moves the torch in a different direction to where you're facing. It makes encountering zombies in the dark much scarier, since you need to be aware that reloading has such a big consequence, especially when you're about to be swarmed. I love the way zombies can instantly pour out of a doorway in a split second. There's always that bit inside me that jumps when I see dozens of zombos heading my way. These situations demand quick reactions and knowing the layout of the areas you're in so you don't get stuck in a corner. And the fact that you can get swarmed at any time in a level makes playing through them so much more interesting. I've been going back and playing through some of my favorite levels, and every time the experience is altered to catch me off guard. I think it would be a lot harder to appreciate this game's atmosphere in co-op, but at that same time, I'm sure it could enhance it if you played with the right people. Maybe one of these days I can find a full squad of people to try the full campaign out with. It would be interesting to see how that experience differs to just playing in single player, but I'm not too upset if that doesn't happen because I really love the vibe of these levels when you're alone. Valve did something really cool here with Left 4 Dead, and I'm annoyed it took me this long to properly try it out. I surprisingly had a really great time with Left 4 Dead. Even after all these years, I think the game still looks fantastic and plays well, and as far as the single player experience goes, I think it's well worth trying out. I'm sure it would be more fun with other human beings, but there's a quality to the game that I think can only really be experienced on your own. If you like what I've shown off here, you should seriously give the game a go like this. It certainly surprised me with how well it executes a lot of its ideas.